an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Holy Sister, the third book of the Ancestor, chapters 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, and Epilogue. In these last chapters, Nona gets to control the moon, and also we get to see what it looks like when Zol finally reaches perfection. And I wouldn't want it. Thanks, but no thanks. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Martin for commissioning this episode. Pretty much, I think, unbroken. You've commissioned the entire series, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Martin? So yeah, thank you for that. I know that's a big commitment. I am really surprised at the ending of this book. There are so many things that I just didn't really think I was going to get to see. And nothing really went as I expected. And when I stop and think about how I thought it would go, I realize I didn't have anything firmly in mind, except for a general, we're going to beat the army. And even though that's so vague that one would think there's no way that's not what happens, it really isn't. Like, I'm going to move my mic. Forgive me if this is loud. I mean, it is what happens in that they get the army to no longer be a threat. But it isn't like our problems are solved and we don't have anything to worry about anymore. So many books end with this sort of feeling of, all right, well, we won, so that is over. And we're just sort of like going to have to learn how to live now. And while there is a feeling of that here, the threat of the ice is very much still a thing. They have more control over what they could potentially do with it. And there's a lot more options laid out in front of them than there were. But it certainly isn't wrapped up. And I think I sort of expected that to happen, that there would be a bit more of a neat bow tied around everything. That said, I'm really glad that there's not. I really liked the ending, and endings are hard to do. I mean, y'all know from all the things that I have covered how much of the time I have hated the way something has ended, and it can be for any number of reasons. If it's a TV show, it can be because it wasn't supposed to go on this long, or it was supposed to have one more season, or somebody, a showrunner took over and changed the whole thing. It could be because an author began to realize they had made too big a world and they weren't ready for that. I'm looking at you, Stephen King, with Dark Tower. Oh my God, just don't get me started on that fucking series. But, you can have like this really great developed world with characters I've grown to care about. That is no guarantee that you are going to bring things to a close and have it feel like there has been closure, which is really the point. I need there to be, for my ideal endings, I want there to still be some open questions. And I think as an author, I could see too, wanting to do that so that you leave yourself room in case you feel like going and writing another one. But this is, it's even less focused on the ice as a threat than I thought, because I had kind of gotten to this place where I was like, we're going to just figure out the ice problem, and that's what controlling the moon is meant to do. And I know we have this army at our gates that we have to deal with first, but that's really the thing we're after. And it's interesting because it feels like the author agrees with me and Nona agrees with me, but that just wasn't carried out in the way that I thought, the way that I sort of expected. It didn't look the way I expected it to look. Because despite not actually getting to see ourselves the ways that we've dealt with the ice, when it comes down to it, that's what Nona has agreed is the real enemy, because she chooses not to wipe out that entire army when she could have. So I am really gratified by that. I was saying in the last episode that I felt for the Skithral a little bit, that everything is being like, all of these people are in a vice and there's not many options available and they just want to live. So it's hard for me to see them as an outright enemy when they are just fighting for survival in a way that feels like an assault to us because we have a POV on the inside. But when you step back and look at the overall situation, it was only a matter of time before people decided to lash out at other territories. And it could very easily have gone the other way. You know, if the Skithral were the ones that were on open land that wasn't being immediately threatened, then Verity people could have been going after, well, Verity's the name of the town. What's the name of the land? Like the country? So it felt like, yeah, Martin is in the chat and Martin is saying, I'm usually not a fan of let the enemy live or we'll be as bad as they are. But of all books, it makes sense for a nun to do it. Yeah, it's a combo of, it makes sense for a nun. I really enjoy finding out that, it's not like absolutely confirmed, but Nona's theory is that Abbess Glass wanted her to become a holy sister also, so that she would learn more about the idea of the unification of like people, and that they are all from the same source and are all children in a way. Basically, the sanctity of life, but I'm, with an asterisk, not pro-life bullshit. And I really love that being added on top of the idea that she wanted Abbess Wheel to like Nona more and therefore give her opinion more credence. I think that's nice. That's an extra layer that, for me, the original reasoning, it worked, but it was a little thin. And this adds more substance behind it and makes it feel more gratifying to me in the end. But also beyond that, the whole let the enemy live or we'll be as bad as they are, in a lot of cases, is done in this way. And I've talked about this on other shows, where I think, and I feel this way in general, especially lately with what's going on in the United States, there are a certain type of people right now who are still preaching this absolute sort of nonviolent protest, but almost to the point where it's just ineffective protest, right? They just don't want to, they don't want to do anything extreme, and they choose to ignore the history of how violence has solved problems in the past. We want to pretend violence doesn't solve anything. That is patently, demonstrably, historically untrue, right? So I get very, very angry when that sort of thing is treated as an absolute, that if you get violent, then you've lost, or you've lost a part of your humanity, or something that there's a puritanical fundamentalism about it that I never subscribe to anything that functions on those sorts of levels. That absolute judgment of this is good, and if you do this, then that's bad. That's just not life. That's never really true, And when people do the if we kill them, we're as bad as they are, oftentimes it's coming from that sort of place where we're pretending that by not bloodying your hands, you're somehow maintaining a moral high ground that keeps you at a distance from the people that you despise. It pretends that it's a division between the two of you that's a steel wall, and makes you totally different than them. And the truth of the matter, in my opinion, is there are some people, And I say this with the full acknowledgement that I don't believe in capital punishment. So I'm talking about this in a story sort of way, in a narrative where we're discussing like a person who has come after a specific group of people and very likely will do so again. Not in a people should be executed by lethal injection because we have a bad justice system, okay? But let's say somebody has an absolute understanding that a person is guilty of something, and that is a particularly heinous crime of some sort. You know, you fill in the blank. There are some people that I think need to be taken out of a civilized society, that they forfeit their right to be part of things if they behave in a particularly abusive, sadistic manner. You just don't get to be part of this anymore. Now, whether that looks like exile or execution obviously would depend on whomever you're speaking to and the surrounding area as well, and the likelihood that somebody would take them in, or that they would survive, that they would come back. But we're talking about, you know, for example, when we talk about like in Harry Potter, and he doesn't kill Wormtail because he thinks, like, he says, my father wouldn't want me to be a killer. And while one could say, yes, and Wormtail wound up owing him, and that wound up turning out in his favor, and he escaped because Wormtail sort of owed him. Also, like, Voldemort wouldn't have gotten his body back. A lot of things wouldn't have happened had Harry killed him then. And so a part of me is just kind of like, well, that was actually a mistake. Like, I get you feeling this way, but the keeping this, like, hero very pure and not having them ever do an evil thing is so easy. And sometimes the sacrifice that a person has to make is being the person who's willing to get their hands bloody, who is willing to take on the fact that they took a life and shoulder the burden of that and recognize the gray there and be willing to go through their life with that weighing on them. And it was for the good of everybody, but that doesn't mean that it is a meaningless act that didn't carry weight. It doesn't mean that their life was absolutely worthless and ending it meant nothing. It simply, it should be the opposite. So this whole situation in this book is really, really different because it's not two armies just fighting each other because they have a grievance. It's two armies fighting for territory because there is a third, like outside third party sort of conflict that is a natural phenomenon that is implacable and inevitable. And so choosing to see your enemy as a sort of partner due to that makes inherent sense in the story. It doesn't feel like you're trying to get around having your hero do shit, you know, and it would especially ring hollow, I think, with Nona if she were to behave like that suddenly when we have seen her murder many people. You know, she has killed a lot of people. So it's not like she's some pure hero. And if that were her only reasoning, it wouldn't work. It would feel very like, I guess, almost like we're supposed to believe that being a holy sister fundamentally changed her personality and her values and priorities. And instead, I was coming into it of a mind which sort of matches where she eventually ends up. Where I was like, man, I really hate this because, like, I don't blame these people for attacking the way they do. They are employing, like, questionable methods. Adoma, is that how you say her name? I think they say something about how, like, she was melting the black ice and drinking it in order to gain some of the power from, like, the devils that inhabit that ice. And that's certainly not great. Like, you know, you can be of a sort of neutral mind about the overall conflict while recognizing that there are problematic people in that system and maybe some of them need to be taken care of. Similar to Scherzel. Scherzel's, like, allegedly on our side. And the woman is just, no, we don't want her on her side. We don't want her to win. Like, I kind of enjoy that, actually. That technically she's supposed to be fighting for the, like, side of people that we care about. But it's obvious within that she has her own agenda, and it doesn't have anything to do with what's good for people. She would absolutely just save herself if that were an option for her and there were no other choice. She'd take that in a heartbeat. Anyway, I've talked for 15 minutes here and I haven't actually gotten to the point. So let's start talking about the actual chapters. Look at how bright I get when I bring up the Kindle app. So, chapter 26, Holy Class. Oh, Krista's here. Hi, Krista. I'm sorry, I didn't even see you. We start off right where we left off on the last chapter, which is Scherzel getting sliced into giant slabs of meat by a bunch of wires. Honestly, I will never get over how gruesome this is as a concept. It's so gross, and it's genius, and it works super well, but goddamn. And, like, I know that because of the universe this is set in, that I think they're made of arc steel. Am I right? So they're a particular type of metal that can accomplish something that allegedly our metals in our actual universe would not be able to. But I wondered a little bit. I do wonder, is that true? Could our, like, metals be utilized in this sort of fashion? Does a weapon like this exist? I am extremely curious about it in a sort of, like, macabre, you know, what's the word I want? Morbid curiosity. Krista, just keep on ignoring me. Fine, I will. So, Krista, have you read these books? Or are you just hanging out for fun? Martin says, not to the extent that it's described, I think, but it could certainly do a lot of damage. Aw, she says she just misses me. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, Martin, is like, you could probably hurt somebody, but I don't think it would cause the kind of, like, basically she walks through these wires and it takes a second for her body to fall apart and for her to even feel the pain because they're so sharp that they pass through her before she quite notices what's happened. So I just keep thinking about it. It's so gruesome. And I love that it's set up right after that other sort of fail-safe was in place so that she really thought she was in the clear and safe, you know, and just walked right through them. Oh, I will never get over that. I think that's going to be like haunting my dreams. So we have a little bit of a moment of confrontation where Ruli is like, the book was a lie. I went through all that for nothing. And I'm very glad that later on we find out that Zol is able to heal her because of being so close to these ship hearts. Because honestly, I understand what Nona's doing. I support her. I support Abyss Glass. The plan had merit, and it clearly worked, and everything is going according to plan, and that's amazing. However, if I were in Ruli's place, I would lose my motherfucking mind. I would be so pissed. The point is, and Nona says, you had to believe that it was valuable so that you would put up enough of a fight and behave in a convincing enough way that they would really believe it was worth capturing you over and taking you here. And I get it. There are some people who are not good actors. And so you try and bring them in on your scheme and they can't pull it off. And I don't even know if Nona's particularly great at that a lot of the time. Nona tends to just be able to be outwardly aggro, and it never really is a problem because she finds herself in situations where everybody knows she's the enemy already, most of the time. The few times that she has had to sort of compensate for that, she's been able to use either her Marjal empathy or Marcus's in, you know, that heist to get the book in the first place. And so in that sense, I understand keeping this secret and the whole way this had to unfold for it to work. But oh my God, Her wrist is broken. She's had needles dipped in acid shoved under her fingernails. She has watched her friend get tortured also. And then she finds out that it was for nothing. Like, I would never be able to trust Nona again. I wouldn't be able to ever trust her again. And I'm just saying it. She's in the right for what she's trying to do. I fully acknowledge and respect that. But I couldn't continue to be friends on the level I had been with a person who did this. I just couldn't do it. I would always think they were using me for something again. You know, I would never really be able to take anything at face value. That's just so fundamentally damaging to what a friendship is supposed to be. And I don't know if, really feels that way. But if she did, I would not be mad at her at all. So Nona, as she is like talking to both Jula and Ruli, the devils that have sort of shaken free from her because of the ship heart are beginning to get a slightly better hold of her and are, it says, Nona tried to shut out the voices of her devils as they raged against Jula's stupidity. If the girl came any closer, Nona might just reach out in an unguarded moment and end her. She leaned back against the wall. Before that, I need this fucking knife out of my leg. Jula came forward, already unbinding her habit cord to use it as a tourniquet. Nona put her head to the wall and ground her teeth while Jula set to work. And I found this really alarming in this moment, that she's starting to get a little bit overwhelmed by them being the devils. And it's so weird to call them that. I'm never going to get used to that. It works when I'm listening to the audiobook or reading the book, but once I say it myself, I'm like, that's nothing. I don't like it. I think as a writer, I think that it works and it's fair, but I don't like discussing it in this way. So Nona sends away all of Scherzel's guards, basically screams at them. Clara has the nerve, as they're looking at Joelle, because Joelle's tied up. Clara has the absolute nerve to say, I know her, one of Scherzel's creatures. We should get the truth out of her. Scherzel didn't have all her eggs in one basket. She was only going to share with Adoma as a last resort. She was after more ship hearts of her own. I know that much. She had an agent among the ice tribes, and she'd set her hunting down old stones. You really don't want to know who I heard it was, but rich girl here, she knows for sure. And later on, tries to say again that she should be killed. That they should just end Joelle's life. And Nona finally has to be like, bitch, do you fucking think that we've all forgotten where you were and what you've been doing? I want to find the actual quote. It's not within this scene. It takes a little while to get there. But it's really one of the few moments of rebuke that comes from Nona. She is willing to let things slide with Clara in a way that, while they're in the midst of a battle, I understand the necessity, but I don't feel that that's the one thing that's a little unsatisfying to me. I don't feel that Clara ever actually gets sort of like a confrontation about what she did. We just see her at the end, and I think the epilogue, and she's clearly successful and just able to make money hand over fist doing whatever it is she's doing. And I'm a little bit bummed that there isn't at least somewhat of a reckoning for Clara, because it feels like every time we have any sort of reckoning, it's always emotional. It's always about her grappling with her own guilt, her own doubt, but there's never a material outside consequence for what she's done. And I don't get a sense there ever was. It just doesn't feel like, when Nona sees her, we don't have that, there's no memory that comes up in her mind when she sees Clara that indicates to us anything ever happened to her. And she fucking stabbed Ara in the back, and I guess we're just supposed to like act like that didn't happen. Is Aura supposed to just be okay with that? Is everybody willing to take Nona's lead on simply letting bygones be bygones in this respect? I mean, talk about not wanting to trust your friend again. I wouldn't be able to be around Clara. It's weird that she's able to come and visit all the time and that anybody is willing to talk to her. This is the one thing that to me felt like an unfinished story, and that there was like a transition into a type of life for her that I didn't really understand how that could possibly have happened. It seems like Clara's burned so many bridges, and I just don't really know what that would have looked like or what I would have liked to see, because you punish Clara and she goes running off again, right? That's like who she is as a person. She doesn't like to face consequences. She has a huge amount of resentment and entitlement. And that combination makes it so that any sort of rebuke causes her to lash out against you and distance herself from you. So I understand feeling like you're kind of in a corner with her as a character, but I still feel like it's something that could be done. You would just have to show your work, show us the conversation or the event, something to give us an explanation, because otherwise it just feels like we abruptly transition into everything is fine and she's super successful. And I'm like, how? Martin says, I agree. I don't like how Clara gets away completely scot-free. Yeah. I don't know. I found that very surprising, especially in light of the fact that Clara has just consistently been untrustworthy. I mean, from the start, we have seen how shady she was. And then we get 2 books of her straddling the line of which side she wants to be on. I really thought that was all leading to a sort of confrontation of some kind. And it's just really strange to me we don't get anything. That moment with Nona yelling at her, well, who the fuck do you think you are, is really the only thing that we get. So, I'm trying to find the moment here where we transition to Zol turning up. Let's see. Oh, right. Okay. It's actually right after this. Rich girl here, she knows for sure. And then Ara calls out to Nona from the hallway. And there is this like bright flash of light. And Joelle screams, "Yisht." And for a second, when Nona turns and looks, she also thinks it's Yisht. And then she realizes it's Zol. And it turns out that Nona had told the girls that Zol had died. So when they were saying, I miss Zol in that previous chapter, they meant it as a grief-like statement, as we thought she was dead, which I didn't pick up on that in the conversation. I thought that could have been taken either way, and I was interpreting it as Zol is dead, simply because I had seen a scene that seemed to point in that direction. And then once we realized she's not dead, I'm like, oh, okay, they just meant because they haven't seen her in a long time. But I guess Nona lied to everyone. And the 2 of them had been sort of like taking turns meeting with Abbess Glass and getting their individual assignments for this overall plan. So Zol steps out, and it says, on the Abbess's instruction, she had led them all to believe Zol to be dead and made no mention of Yisht. And we find out a little bit later that it's being circulated still that Yisht is still alive, even though she's not, in order to keep Scherzel thinking that Yisht is out there working for her interests. And I realized that's actually a pretty smart move. As soon as she knows Yisht is dead, she'll find somebody to replace her or find another way to get it done. And letting her think that, oh yeah, she's still working on it is actually a very good distraction. Nona hadn't heard from Zol again for nearly 2 years, and when she did, it was to discover that they were threadbound. Somehow, during their long escape from the black ice, when Zol carried her half senseless from that freezing hell, the ice triber had forged the bond between them. At Abbess Glass's suggestion, Zoll had set herself the task of bringing to the Empire both of the ship hearts controlled by her tribe. At the same time, and seemingly at her own behest, Zoll had set to convincing the Emperor's sister that Ish still lived and was attempting exactly the same thing. So, Zoll is here, and she's brought 2 ship hearts with her from her tribe. One that's red, and the other bright green. And then it turns out that the Noi Gwyn ship heart is a black violet. It says a black violet that seared the eye, which is interesting. And the other golden. I'm trying to think because I think later on, Nona says something about how the Noi Gwyn ship heart never really heated the water at Sweet Mercy the same way. And so I have to imagine that each of the ship hearts has its own sort of like particular strength in a direction, regarding the kind of energy that it emits. But we don't get any sort of detail about what that is or why that is. Martin says, I think one is for each bloodline. Yeah, but like, what does that mean? One is for each bloodline, like they put their blood into it? Is it that each bloodline that came, like, they talk about how they arrived on the ships, 4 different races, right? But they're all using a very similar technology. And yet they function almost identically, or so it seems to us coming at it from, this historical perspective. Why do they operate so differently? And why would the ways in which they operate be relevant to their race specifically? I just don't really understand how. I understand, like, the simplicity of that symbolism. But in a practical sense, I don't really understand how that could work or what that would even mean. So which one of the 4 bloodlines would heat water the most effectively? And why? That's the kind of question that I had with this. And I wish that it was talked about a little bit more. I think that's like overall with the like storyline of these 3 books, the one major criticism that I have to the world building is I would like a little bit more of the ways in which the ship hearts work. A little bit more of the logistics, unsurprisingly. Because it feels so vague to me. And in some ways you need it to be because they are almost magical. That feels like they truly are. But there's also a point at which it feels like you don't want to, like, it feels like the author didn't want to nail himself down too much because he wanted to be able to sort of do whatever and be like, well, it's because of the ship heart. So I have a bit of mixed feelings on that, where it doesn't feel quite grounded enough to me. And therefore, everything is so wide open in potential. I mean, there is the grounding of people aren't able to go near them easily. So it's not like just anybody can step in and use them the way that they do. And that they are extremely dangerous. But the way that they had been used and the understanding of how they function, it doesn't feel like... We know that people can't get close to them because we've seen what happens firsthand with our characters, and Nona's reaction to holding it and the way she describes it feeling, and the way that people around her react when they get near it and they shy away and are just like, holy shit, what the fuck is that? But we don't really get a sense of like what all of the study of these ship hearts has really been, and any of the lore. It's just a general sort of like mythology, and the fact that they are used as a power source in a general sense. It's not there. Things like this, I would think, would be subject to a lot of investigation and scrutiny by like scientists and religious types. And we don't really hear about anything like experiments on trying to figure out exactly what it is or replicate it or the effects of these devils breaking off. This feels like something that people should know about if they've come in contact with them at all. Like that this happens really, really easily. And yet Nona had no idea that they did this until Zol told her. Granted, it's not like people are walking around carrying ship hearts all the time so that this happens but it's not, as far as I know, written down in any of like the documentation that Nona studies at school that this happens. And I would really think that ship hearts being the cause of devils existing would be much more common knowledge. I would think that this would be something that would be cited as like, I mean, potentially a mark against ship hearts because devils are so feared by everybody. But that just feels like a pretty major thing for nobody to ever really talk about or the fact. Martin is saying maybe the energy given off is slightly different and the sigils are focused to the one at Sweet Mercy, not a different one. Oh, so you mean like the infrastructure for using the ship heart is attuned to... I got you. I mean, maybe. But that's sort of what I mean, is that maybe, but we don't know. There's not enough information. And maybe it's because it's not really the priority of the author to get into exactly the mechanics of how this works. But for me, it makes the ship hearts feel a little bit like a Deus Ex Machina. Like they're so powerful and there's not a lot of constraint that I know of to their power that it just lets them be anything. And I would really have liked there to be a little less mystery surrounding them from the start so that I had a better idea what we were really dealing with. When I said last episode that I found this writer's writing to be a little bit more slippery than others because sometimes things aren't explicitly said and I have to sort of like either figure it out or take it like, oh, I'm not supposed to know and he'll tell me later. That's sort of the thing that I think is a major factor for me in feeling that way, is that the ship hearts just didn't feel quite defined enough. And so when they began to enter in and be a bigger factor in the story, I felt ill-equipped as a reader to comprehend what was really happening or at stake. And by the end of this section, I feel like I get it better than I have in any other part of the book. But I still don't really feel like I've got a great grasp on it. So anyway, they use these four to open up the ark and step inside. And I love how everybody is sort of thinking that they're going to be able to turn levers and pull, you know, they'll push some buttons and there'll be some dials that they can turn. They're basically expecting some sort of like steampunk machine. And they go in and there's a chair and that's all. It's literally like bare walls. What we find out is that it functions on Alexa. So they can just talk and it's just doing the thing. And it'll just pop up a screen right in front of your face and show you. And you don't need a desk, you don't need a console, you know, but they aren't used to that. So at first they're just like, what the fuck do we do? And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because there's a moment where Nona inhabits Kettle. Again, we go back to the front of the battle, the front lines, and it turns out, later on we find out that Apple is indeed dead. And I said last episode how I was really not hoping Apple was dead, because that sounds really cruel. I like Apple as a character. But that I felt like if the author was faking us out, and it turned out he was like acting as if Apple had died, but she winds up being fine, I would be disappointed by that. I don't like being tricked by an author. And there's a big difference between being tricked and being misled. You know, when you're misled, it feels like much more your own doing. The author gave you some information and you chose to interpret it this way. And they knew you probably would, and they let you. And then they just, shared some revelations later and you realize, oh shit, I was really on the wrong track. When you're being tricked, it feels cheaper and it feels much more... I was talking about this when I was covering Cradle just earlier tonight. I have said that the whole thing with George R.R. Martin being as ruthless as he is with killing characters has been a bit overstated. He actually walks back the death of characters a fair amount. He goes so hard so quickly, so early, that he earned a reputation that I don't think he entirely deserves. That said, it spawned this sort of mimicry in writing where a lot of writers seem to think that they had to kill people right and left in order to be taken seriously or be seen as committing. And it seemed much more to me oftentimes like they were just killing characters to get a reaction out of their readers, and not because it made sense to the story, not because they thought it would be a genuine emotional moment. They just wanted to establish their creds. And so then you get these moments where they will go too far and they will have violence and reaping of people that it feels like, why are we doing this? And sometimes they'll do that sort of thing where they pretend somebody has died because they're trying to make you feel a thing. And then, surprise, bitches, bet you thought you seen the last of me, and it turns out they're alive. You can do I thought they were dead and they're not. And it's totally works. That happens all the time. But when you as a writer have complete control over my mental camera and you choose to show me something very explicitly and very in particular, and then later on it turns out that that was not true, or it was filtered in such a incredibly, it was being written so deliberately in a certain direction, that feels much more manipulative and much less like you're letting me have some freedom within them to interpret what's happening. So the fact that things went down with Apple the way they did, to me, it just really pointed to she was going to die. And I'm so glad that he decided to stick with that. I'm curious. I would love to ask whether or not he grappled with that at all. If he was like, maybe I won't have Apple die. Because I do know that the kill your gays trope is a very real thing. It was something that I didn't even know about 5 years ago. And then recently, with doing what I do for a living, you just start to understand that stuff more and hear about it more. So I could understand if people got mad about this, or if Mark Lawrence kind of was like, I don't know if I want to do that. But I feel like he avoids that pitfall and that trope because Apple and Kettle wind up not being the only queer couple in the entire story. And that's really part of what's so what people, I think it's an undervalued point in the argument for more representation of minorities, whether that be racially or sexually or whatever. If you only have one person or one couple representing an entire demographic, everything that you do to them is going to feel like a symbolic statement, And if that's part of the advantage of having multiple black characters, having multiple gay characters, having multiple women, for God's sake, let's go bare minimum. And it's, you run into the same thing with just having a female-led superhero movie where we, as women, it's like, if we don't love this and talk it up, we're sort of betraying feminism because it's the only movie out there that has a female director and female lead and whatnot. And so it's this symbolic thing instead of being able to just treat it like a fucking movie, like any other movie. So I've really appreciated his commitment to following through. Apple does die, we face the like horrific grief of Kettle, and that is treated with the respect that it deserves and the gravity that it deserves. And yet there's a little hint dropped later that there is somebody who's maybe in love with Kettle waiting on the side for her to eventually move past this grief because she is hoping to start something with her. And I like that there's that kernel of hope embedded there as well. Also, there's a moment when they have like just finished sort of taking care of the bodies later, where Nona is hugging Kettle and it says that she let the river of her grief wash over her. And it got me thinking about how great a metaphor that is. I loved that. The idea of grief being a river. If you think about the earth as like who you are, your soul. And there are certain things that are sort of fundamental to who you are. And yet, you do change over the course of your life. And grief can be talked about as if it's something that you get over. But those of us who have lost people know that's not how that works. Grief is something that you just have to sort of learn to live with. And talking about it like it's a river, it is that what is a river? But it's a trickle that eventually digs a furrow and fundamentally changes a landscape entirely, and is a slow sort of soft energy that plows through solid rock and leaves a mark forever. Even once a river's dried up and gone, there could be a canyon hundreds of feet deep left, and it's still a scar. And seeing grief that way, and like ourselves, our souls as like the earth, grief being a river and cutting its way through and leaving marks behind, that really works for me as a concept. I really like, and I don't know that, Mark Lawrence meant it with that much detail, but it just sort of got that started, that thought in my head, and I followed it through, and I was like, that works really well. So let's see. Martin says, I think it's also that it's not only the gay characters that die. There's a lot of other characters that die too. Iron Tallow, Apple Wheel. Yeah, but that's the only romantic relationship, right? Like, other than Nona and Ara, as far as we know, there were no other like romantic entanglements. So, he says Leanie and Alada are a couple. Oh, I didn't realize that. I knew that they were meant to be always together, but I thought that was a platonic thing. They were roommates. Sorry, I did the thing. All right. Well, see, and this is what I'm talking about. See, that helps. It's nice. I like it. That's good. Good. All right. So we go to the actual chamber, and it becomes more and more clear that Zol has been she reached the final level. She has been purified by her contact with all of these ship hearts. And this is also extremely interesting to me, and it's a shame that we don't get more information about this. If they were each meant to be representative of a bloodline, why is it that we need all four of them? And were all of the people from every bloodline forced to come in contact with all four ship hearts, that all of them could be purified? When we go into the arc, the voice says you have to be purified in order to control it. So was there one person who had been sort of chosen and put through this? Or were they all put through this? And why is it that we need all four of them to accomplish it? How does that work? Why? Again, I know that maybe the author doesn't care. And maybe I shouldn't care. Maybe I'm getting caught up in the wrong things, but it's putting a lot of it's asking me to take a lot for granted that I don't feel comfortable with, because so much of the information that we've had has turned out to be wrong with, the way that magic can work in this world. I don't like taking anything for granted anymore. So I just don't, I would like to know more about like why that happens and if that's something that was super common and it like what it is about these that causes this to happen. Magic, I guess that's fine. So what it basically comes down to is that Nona has to convince Zol to give her control over the focus moon. And Zol initially doesn't want to do it and feels like Nona hasn't been subject to the purification, and therefore her judgment isn't necessarily to be trusted. Which, to a point, I understand. But I really enjoy when Nona's like, well, what do you think about what's going on down there? Like, could you do it? And Zol says something about how basically she isn't like feeling connected anymore. I feel as if I were falling away from everything. I see a wider existence as though all of Abath were just like your corridor, a slice through something bigger. Really, what she's saying is, I see such a big picture that this doesn't really feel like it matters. And Nona is just like, girl, do you hear yourself? Like, I get your hang up and you aren't wrong. I am imperfect for sure. But also, I give a shit, which is more than I can say for you. So I say, give me the fucking keys to the car. And to her credit, Zol is still like there enough that she hears Nona. And eventually Nona's like, and I love you and would die for you. You know that. This isn't selfishness. Trust me, please. And I really liked that moment. She tries to put the decision onto other people and like take so much feedback. And as somebody who can go too far with that myself, try and take so many points of view into consideration that I wind up stymied, I really understand the impulse of doing that. I can't make a decision like this. Half of me wants to burn a path a mile wide right through every Skithral city. The louder half says we should burn it all. I am unfit to judge. So, this is when Zol offers Nona to take the Raulathu from her devils. She can just take them right out of Nona and move her along with being purified. And part of the problem in this moment too is that all of the girls here are finding out that Nona has these devils for the first time. They didn't understand what was happening with her. And they've been fed a lot of propaganda on what these are and what they do. So their instinct is to be like, yeah, what the fuck? Get them out. But Nona recognizes that they are a part of her and they may be ugly and they may be a little bit poisonous in the things that they tell her to do, but they are an undeniable part of her personality. And as much as the thought of being purified of them is in concept sort of welcome, in practice, it's sort of a cheating. It's like a shortcut of like, instead of working on yourself to actually be a better person, you just turn that part off, which is sort of not the point, in my opinion, of being alive. I also appreciate how all of this, like, that Zol has been through even before now, explains so much about her personality. You know, she arrived at Sweet Mercy Convent with this sort of, like, unreadable character. And she hardly had any threads as well when Nona like tried to observe her. There was so much about her that felt really strange. And she had touched 2 ship hearts by then and had big pieces of her personality sort of like removed. So it makes a lot of sense why the thread attachment to the rest of the world was far less than it would be for anybody else. And also why like her emotional responses to things felt oddly sort of stunted or what's the word I want? When something subdued, you know? So yeah, Nona eventually convinces her to hand over the keys. And we find out, like, right before this, that the moon can be brought to, like, a very tight point, that focus, and can also be basically turned completely on and off, which is very helpful. So we then go to Kettle again, and she gets to be, like, in the front row seats to watching what happens with the moon. It turns on, and everybody stops dead. It's a massive battle. People are dying. And yet the moon suddenly showing up at a time when it's not, and it's like very sudden, causes everybody to stop and look around like, what's going on? And then Nona writes across the moon, "Go home." And at first, Adoma is like, "Go home, fuck you. I know this is a fucking trick. You think we're just going to turn around and walk away after everything we fucking been through and how close we are? Sure, you want us to turn around now that your walls are all down and we've slaughtered almost half your people. Oh, yeah, we'll definitely just walk away, idiot." And just sort of, it's very derisive. The moon lit again, though not to full focus. A brilliant light fell around Adoma's throne, filling half the width of the road. The intensity rose from dazzling to blinding so swiftly that there was almost not enough time to look away. A moment later, the searching circle of light had gone, replaced by a general illumination bringing the day to Verity's night. She heard the screaming before she saw the source. All around the fringes of the area where the brilliance had risen, Skithral were burning. The screams came from farther back, where warriors rolled around the pain of their scalded flesh but were not actually on fire. In the place where Adoma's platform had been borne on the shoulders of 100 men, there was nothing. Just a black circle 20 yards across. No trace of the platform, of the throne, of the people upon it or beneath it. Even their smoke seemed to have been burned from the air. The moon dimmed, and the words returned. "Go home." And everywhere the Skithral started to run. Listen. She made her point. That was a really good method. It's not without casualties, and that's fine, because everybody was going to fucking die already. Like, well, there was no avoiding that. But she managed to keep it very concentrated and focused, pun intended, and make her point. And that was a damn good idea. And I really like that she can write on the moon. What a wild idea. This is the kind of thing that in like a dystopian novel, which I guess you could say this sort of is, but they would like sell advertisements for, you know, be able to write Coke across the moon. So they have that big conversation about why she didn't kill them all when she had the chance. And of course, Clara is like the most vocal one. Clara, I really wanted her to start to understand the concept of having mercy, considering how many times it has been extended to her by Nona. And she just never gets it. That the attitude she has would have led to her having been killed years ago at this point. And yet Nona has allowed her to stay alive. And maybe that means something. But no, not to Clara. She doesn't absorb lessons, it doesn't feel like. So this is when we have, she killed Darla, Clara said. Doesn't she deserve to die? I didn't, Joelle protested, her pretty face ugly with fear. I wanted her to run. That's a lie, Ara roared, suddenly furious. But I took Sister Apple's truth pill. Ara shook her head violently. Your father paid to have your memories altered. I don't know how many of our friends died out there tonight, but it will be too many. I don't think I can let this stain walk out of here. I love that she uses the word stain and not any particular noun in front of it, because just saying stain, I feel like, is way more evocative and sort of insulting. Gradually, Nona is able to get them all to calm down because Ara's really like about to just cut her throat. And she has Zol come over and look at Joelle and find out whether or not Joelle's memories have been altered. And according to Zoe, that has not happened. Joelle genuinely did not want Darla to die, which I was very surprised by. I mean, I really, a part of me appreciates this, and another part of me is sort of side-eyeing it a little bit, where, okay, maybe she didn't want Darla to die, but we've seen the traps that she's laid and the damage that she's inflicted, and whether or not she wanted actual death doesn't change that. But I do understand Nona's perspective in being I don't get to decide that, though. So I have very mixed feelings on that. I'll say that. So she killed Darla, Clara reiterated. She can't walk away from that. You never even liked Darla, Nona said. You poisoned her and left her helpless for Raymond Taxis and his soldiers, so perhaps you should hold your tongue, Clara. Good for you. That's the absolute least. I am out of time, good God. We jump ahead to dealing with the bodies. I appreciate sort of how... If I call this tedious, it's going to sound like I'm insulting the author, but I don't mean it that way. But I just appreciate how much detail he goes into regarding finding the bodies. And eventually there's even somebody that, Nona saw where she fell through Kettle's eyes, but when she goes there, she can't find her. And so they never find that girl's body, and sort of how saddening that is, and the ways in which they are all awake for days at a time because there's so many injured, and there's so much cleanup to be done that anybody who has been healed, as they all are healed by Zoe, they are in the minority, and so they need to pick up all the slack that they can. It felt very real to me. And something that doesn't really get included in a lot of stories about war that I have read, at least. So then I'm going to jump ahead to the epilogue since I'm out of time here. Nona becomes Mistress Blade, which makes total sense. I was sort of wondering if it wasn't going to be that Nona would eventually be the abbess, but I'm really glad that isn't the case because she just doesn't feel suited to that. Not that she would be at this young age, I wouldn't think anyway, but nevertheless, whenever you have a story with somebody who is advanced or a chosen one or just more talented than other people, it can be really easy to put them in every position of importance in the story over and over again. So she gets summoned to talk to the Abbess Rule, and it turns out that she's in trouble because they caught Regal trying to sneak in again. And this forces her to come to terms with what she has been putting off, which is deciding what space in the world she wants to occupy. Does she want to be Mistress Blade and be a nun and be here at the Abbey? Or does she want to go out into the world and live her life? And it's made very clear to her that if she chooses the second, they won't hold that against her. But she needs to pick. She can't stay and constantly break the rules like this. This isn't commitment. And so she has a conversation with Regal where she basically is like, look, I know this sucks, but you are guaranteed to get over this. And I don't want you to go, but I don't want to keep doing this either. And it's written really well in a way that gets across. It's not like it's nothing for her to give him up, but it will heal very quickly. He's as it's described there, Regal let her hand go and walked away towards the convent building, slow at first, then more briskly. By the time he was halfway to the nearest of them, he had started to whistle. I liked that. Just really clearly letting us know, oh, he's going to be fine. They'll both be fine. And she keeps sitting there after this, sort of just thinking about her life. And then all of a sudden, Ara turns up. And we had learned that Ara was the lord of her, her family is all dead. The place was basically leveled, but there's still land. and she stood to inherit. And so she's ostensibly still over there getting courted and turning down all of her suitors. But here she is, and she tells Nona that she gave it up and let her sister have the title because she had always wanted it. And she has come back to be Sister Thorn. I made my little sister the Lord. And the two of them, like, just hold each other and have this moment of, like, intimacy. And it's just so sweet. And I was so happy. And then the last line, which I really liked, moons might rise and fall, empires wax and wane, even the stars come and go. But there are constants, too. And though the story of our kind is ever-changing, it is also always the same. And that's a very good ending. I liked it. So, yeah. God, I can't believe I'm at the end of the series already. I saw that I got like a weird promo thing from Amazon that they were like $5 towards another Mark Lawrence book, which I never saw coupons specifically towards certain authors. And there was apparently like another book series that he wrote in the same universe, which I was sort of thinking of checking out. I don't know, Martin, if you've looked at that and if it's any good, but, Martin says, also, you forgot Iron and Tallow being badass and killing enough to make a wall of the dead. Oh, I forgot about that. I just don't have time to talk about everything. Yeah, she killed some gerent that was like, enormous. Anyway, yeah, so I'm curious about more from this author. I would like to check that out. I will have to keep you all posted on that. But thank you so much, Martin, for commissioning this. This was really fun. And it felt very unusual. It felt very different. I like that. So I hope you guys have all been enjoying listening. And, Mark Lawrence, if you're listening, what's up? And I will be seeing you. I don't know with what, but eventually I will be seeing you with more episodes. So until then, hold tight and toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.